Welcome and thanks for joining us today for part 2 in our Parks with Purpose Spring webinar series. Today we're going to be talking to you guys about placemaking and placekeeping elements in park design and stewardship. We really thought that during this time of sheltering in place, it would be really great to sort of unpack some of the principles of our Parks with Purpose initiative through a series of webinars where we get a chance to sort of do a deeper dive with a lot of the key partners who help us collaboratively implement our Parks with Purpose program. So a few housekeeping things just that I want to go over are that we have everyone muted so that we can make sure that myself and the other presenters are able to sort of like focus on their presentations without anyone unintendedly distracting with background noise. So if you have any like questions or concerns, please feel free to put that in the chat. You can privately message Kelsey Eccles or myself and we can address any issues you might have. And feel free to type chats or questions into the chat, but we're going to save questions and answers till the end of the presentation, just so that we can get through the discussion. And then we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end to sort of address the questions that people have posed in the chat box. So I'm going to do a brief intro of our presenters and just go over the Parks with Purpose initiative, and then we'll get into our webinar. And just a brief note that this go round, we decided to do kind of more of a conversational approach to the webinar. So I'm going to be facilitating the presentation by asking each of our presenters some questions that I queued up based on my knowledge of each of their individual expertise and the work that they've done in general in their careers and specifically the work that they do in our Parks with Purpose initiative. So I think that's all the intro info that we need. So just to briefly go over Parks with Purpose and how this is all connected, the Conservation Fund basically is a conservation acquisition organization. So, you know, primarily the Conservation Fund focuses on making land deals specifically for conservation purposes. And the Parks with Purpose initiative is really innovative in that rather than focusing on wildlands, large swaths of conservation projects in, in national park settings, or the way that we traditionally think of conservation projects and programs, Parks with Purpose initiative specifically focuses on conservation wins for urban contexts. So the principles of Parks with Purpose are focusing on having benefits, social benefits, economic benefits, and environmental benefits. So we invest in our people by making sure that we empower community leaders to actually take an active role in leadership in various aspects of our park projects. We invest in the environment by making sure that we're acknowledging and working through with the communities the environmental justice legacies that are related to the communities and the park projects that we're working on, as well as investing in environmental resiliency through green infrastructure investments in our park projects. And then we invest in the economy by making sure that, we are supporting collaborative economic investments with community organizations and local businesses being involved in our projects, and also making sure that community members are getting opportunities for economic development through the course of our projects. So that's a little bit about Parks with Purpose. Today we're talking about placemaking, placekeeping, and stewardship as one of the core concepts of Parks with Purpose. And now I'm just going to give you a brief intro of the super awesome suite of presenters we have today. So first up, we've got Kofi Boone. Kofi, I'll just say personally, really inspires me. He's an award-winning academic in the field of landscape architecture and design. He's a professor at NC State College of Design, and he really focuses on both educating and implementing landscape design projects where he both teaches and thinks about how to innovatively use technology and other approaches to community engagement that really tries to get at the core of how we can more equitably engage communities in park design and visioning processes. And he specifically has helped us in both our Durham and Raleigh Parks with Purpose projects, and he has really played a pivotal role in helping to consult on both our community engagement and design of our park projects in the Triangle area. And then we're going to hear from Sarah Hope, who is currently the program manager for the Greater Baybrook Alliance. She's trained as a landscape architect and has over a decade of experience working as a landscape architect and designer, having experience both working for the public sector, working for City of Baltimore's Department of Recreation and Parks, as well as working for various nonprofit organizations. And right now she's focusing on program managing revitalization projects for our very close CDC partner, the Greater Baybrook Alliance. She also has experience in teaching, being a chef, and an event planner. And then we're going to hear from Rodette Jones, who is such a community champion in South Baltimore. She works as a garden manager for Filbert Street Garden in Curtis Bay, as well as a community organizer for Greater Baybrook Alliance. And all around, she plays a very strong community leader support role for a lot of organizations in the South Baltimore area, as I'm sure anyone would tell you if you ask them who lives or works in the Greater Baybrook area. So we've got a really great suite of presenters for you today that I'm really excited about. And I'm going to start with my first question for Kofi, and that is, so on our first webinar, we heard from some of our Atlanta partners about the importance of community building and creating community ownership of parks and the design process. But as a landscape designer and professor, I'd love it if you could define for our audience the concepts of placemaking and placekeeping and why these concepts are so important in educating equity-minded landscape architect students. And also why these concepts are so important to the community engagement process in designing a park and leading a community visioning process for a park.
All right. Well, happy to do that. And I'll say thank you to everybody for the invite to participate. And thank you for everybody that's viewing. I'm going to try and share my screen now. I think that with both terms, they're flying around a lot in a lot of communities, and there are a lot of questions drawn from them. But I like to add a third point, which is for whom, so placemaking and placekeeping in whose interest. And so that's part of the question that this leads to. And working with a lot of communities in environmental justice contexts and diverse communities in a lot of places that haven't had a lot of investment or a lot of economic interest in some time, particularly if they're close to fast-growing parts of the city, there's an anxiety and a concern that any kind of evidence of reinvestment could be for other people, could be for populations that may not be there now, could be for the interests of people who aren't current residents. And although I'm sorry, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just said absolutely.
Yeah. So, this pattern, which is anecdotes to some people, that even here in our region, there have been a lot of controversies and conflicts between community residents and people who wanted to reinvest in city centers, so that, they're following the pattern of a lot of places around the world. We often don't acknowledge these patterns that have happened in the past, where promises were made, where investments were made, but they had a detrimental impact to communities. And so Minnie Fuller Thompson, who's now at the New School in New York, but who wrote a really important book called Root Shock, which talks about the psychiatric and the psychological impacts of losing your home place, tracks this over time. And if you see on the chart, every 40 years or so, there's a major episode where billions of dollars were spent And in some cases, communities, particularly Black and brown communities in cities, were left holding the bag. And so this is a part of the living memory of a lot of people in these communities. And so when they hear terms that are unfamiliar and they see new resources being invested, it's a question that's asked, what does it really mean? Project for Public Spaces is a really important organization led by Fred Kent that talks about placemaking. And their definition of placemaking, I think, is pretty comprehensive. And their process of defining place, is, as a professional and as an educator, pretty sound. So, there are places that have meaning that require investment, investment to provide places for us to socialize, activities that we might want to have, access to places we want to go, and some comfort. And then in this diagram, on the left, it's a circle and it starts to move out to bigger and broader systems. And the diagram on the right, which outlines their process, defining the place, defining the stakeholders, placing the vision, short-term experiments, ongoing evaluation. Who's going to argue with that? So, the ability to bring together people from a community to generate a vision for places to sit, places of shade, gardens, water, art, activity places, food, that all sounds pretty good. But in the context of that process being deployed in an environment where those kinds of investments are perceived as being attracting others, targeted to others, not really tied to the existing communities that are being served. That's where the conflict kind of comes. And so that's where the placekeeping movement came from. And the term actually comes from England and is really about long-term management of open space and public lands. But you can see on the diagram, everything we just talked about in the previous one is the little tiny arrow at the top. And you see that the majority of the diagram is really about the process and about all the other systems that are required to invest in and maintain this place, sort of putting a primacy on the people that are there. So how is this place going to be governed? Who makes the decisions about it? What kind of partnerships are required to sustain this particular place? How does this impact policy? How are we evaluating it to make sure that it's doing what we want? How are we maintaining it? How are we funding it? These are a lot of questions that in placemaking conversations, because of where they occur and in whose interest they occur, don't really happen. So in short, that's the difference between placemaking and placekeeping.
Thanks. That was a really adept answer. And I just think it's important for us to sort of define those terms, because I think a lot of times, jargon develops and then we language loses its meaning when we forget the intention behind why we're using those words. And I think unpacking those concepts is really important right now, especially as we think about the fact that cities and neighborhoods change and are in flux, but how do we sort of understand how to do that in the most equitable way? And where can we have a middle path between allowing change and adaptation, but also allowing a sense of placekeeping and honoring the people that are still there and have lived in a place.
Right. Exactly right.
And so the second question I have for you is, I'm wondering if you can talk about the importance of translating community visions and needs into design elements. And if you could give some examples of exercises you use to define broad community concepts into specific design elements.
I'd be happy to do that. There are a few examples, but I wanted to start with a term that we all use when we're talking about engaging people, particularly people that are different from us, democratic design. And so that means trying to, through the process, make the rules as clear and as fair as possible, access to information as transparent and as clear as possible, and really the reason why certain decisions were made as transparent as possible. So we can't guarantee through this process that we all get the outcome that we want individually, but we strive to make all of the decisions as accessible and as clear as possible, where they came from. So, a book that, I like a lot that is really inspiring a lot of people who are in this area is Design as Democracy. And so if people are looking for a range of tools that are possible with engaging communities that aren't the typical ones, this is a great reference. And that image on the right is a case that we did in Raleigh that is included in the book as a case study using cell phones. But, everybody is familiar with meetings. Meetings are fun. I like meetings. This particular meeting was from Princeville, which is the oldest Black free charter town in the United States, founded in 1865. And this is immediately after Hurricane Matthew. So this is where this community was flooded, and we were constructing a vision. And so, one of the things that we learned through that process is that, the typical tools that we use to engage folks in an equitable way are fine, but there's a need for more. There's a need for innovation and for new ways to do it. One thing that we learned was that not everybody comes to these situations with an equal access to information that they need to make a good decision. So in this case, working with communities that were recovering from flood, we developed a lot of different tools to help communities, self-regulate, self-educate before they even engage in the decision-making process. So knowing what the language is, knowing how to read maps, knowing where to find information, knowing what the options are in terms of policy, we tried to do through guides and through online tools and through mobile tools before we even saw them, so sometimes what makes community work difficult is that you're doing multiple things at the same time. For some people, it's the first time they may have seen a map or the first time that they've been aware of a particular policy or know that something's changing in the first place. And on the other hand, they might have other kinds of information that other people don't have that they really want to get out and there's no vehicle for it. So trying to pull those apart of it is something that we've tried to do. Using smartphones and mobile devices is something that I know that we've been pushing really hard. And now, in the COVID quarantine, it's something that's really being looked at elsewhere, is that you can get access to information, participate and change and give feedback, in some cases without being in the physical room. So this is Chavis Park in Southeast Raleigh. And part of that process was that park was important to a lot of people based on their memories of that place. And there was really no way of going to a resource to capture what those memories are. So we created a training protocol for seniors in the neighborhood who had those memories to go out in the park on their own with smartphones and record self-authored digital videos. And so they walked around and told stories about, Billy Eckstein or Ella Fitzgerald swimming in the pool, or incredible football game in the stadium that doesn't exist, or Shakespeare in the park, or any kind of thing that if you went there on your own, you would have no idea that those things occurred, and those actually played a role in how those people were perceiving the value of this place. And we were happy that those stories, they got mapped on an online map. That online map got lots of views. It influenced their ability to get historic designation for that particular park, and then eventually a $12.5 million bond issue to renovate that park and have elements in the park reflect those elements of heritage. And so we did the meetings, we did all the traditional pieces, but it was this sort of participatory tool that put the power of telling a story in the hands of the people that live there that really helped get over some log jams. And the one that, introduced me to the Parks of Purpose mission in Southeast Raleigh with the Walnut Creek wetland and Bailey Drive. And so we were at a point where that particular community had a lot of things they wanted to do in a lot of different places. And one of the hardest things to do when you have a lot of community folks is determining what happens first, and sometimes people feel like they're gonna lose. Like if my priority is not the top and first priority, you're telling me it's in the future phase, but no, I don't trust you. It's not going to happen. So trying to develop a transparent process that asked everyone to really start to sort and prioritize what they wanted to do first was really the goal. And so we developed a lot of tools to help people in real time through all their goals, really help us. What really matters, what's really important is a Venn diagram, a little sketch in the lower left of that slide that shows people voting, in terms of all of the priorities that they wanted in this particular place. What do they really think is most important? And in real time, our students, did the data analysis to share with the group what the group said was most important. And then different kinds of exercises that don't require a lot of technical knowledge. So using images to create pictures of their vision of what a place can be, using transparencies, or storytelling, having people tell stories about places that are important to them. We kind of deployed different methods. And I think one thing that really helped with this process was we were able in real time to share results. So it was almost like an instant poll. So, everybody came in with their own priorities, but these are the ones you said that were most important. So green infrastructure, local community engagement in environmental activities. And so that helped to build consensus and say, hey, these are the things that we're looking for in whatever place emerges. And of the many places that were being selected, this is a map, heat map, that shows where people put their preference in terms of where to start. And you'll notice a bright red sort of hexagon at the bottom. That's Bailey Drive. And so in a matter of 2 hours, we went from many, many priorities to 2. And we went from many, many sites to 1. And, student tools, and the tools of the trade, landscape architecture, creating plans, creating drawings, those things help. But I think that it also helped that they were making an informed decision. They were clear about what priorities they wanted and where they wanted to go. And I think that helped the process move forward.
Absolutely. And I'll just say, I'm so grateful that we had your guidance and your students to help us in that process, because, as a new park project manager, I don't think that I didn't realize, and I think our team didn't realize, the challenge of starting from a blank slate of decision-making about site selection, because historically in Parks with Purpose, usually we were already working with a park situation that was already chosen. And so really starting from scratch with going through the process of site selection, we didn't even know what we were getting into. I think the can of worms that really is to move a community through that process. And it was kind of a beautiful experience for me to be able to have this collaborative learning situation where the students were learning as designers how to think about activities to democratize this process of site selection. And then community members also learning about these things, and myself learning as a young, park professional how to sort of help facilitate this process. And so the last question I have for you, Kofi, is if you could just talk about how you think diversity in landscape architecture, or the lack thereof, directly relates to the health and development of urban Black and Brown communities and the environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with a few other terms. When we think about diversity, we think about it within the context of 3 other terms. So justice, equity, and inclusion. And if you're a Star Wars fan, yes, that's intentional. That spells Jedi.
Nerd.
Now, usually equity and diversity have gone together, and inclusion sometimes, but justice in terms of taking active steps to correct systems of inequity is the emerging kind of area with it. So with diversity on its own, it's important, but it's also important to create patterns and systems of equity and responsibility and mutuality, to be thoughtful about that at every step of decision making and representation, and then being bold enough and brave enough to take those corrective steps by being focused on justice. So these stats aren't very different from most of the built environmental professions. You could pick civil engineering, you could pick architecture, you could pick urban planning. You're going to run into a situation where many of them, especially in the last 20 years, have had a very large increase in gender equity, so more women generally in the professions. But with regards to race, still very difficult. So, around 4% Latinx, and less than 1% Black in terms of landscape architecture. Not that much different from the other professions. So it's kind of shocking when you tell people there are only about 200 licensed Black landscape architects in the United States.
It's wild.
But when I graduated, there were only 100. So we're in a very slow roll. But part of what makes that interesting is that, when I was in school, it wasn't a priority of the mainstream practice in our main organizations. The real rallying cry for this kind of talk came from Whitney Young, with a really legendary keynote address he gave at the American Institute of Architects in 1968, immediately following the assassination of Martin Luther King. Whitney Young, of course, a prominent civil rights activist and friend of Dr. King, and was invited to more or less calm everyone in the crowd about this particular topic. but decided to use it more as a rallying cry and really point at the AIA and all organizations that they don't bear any resemblance to the communities that they serve. And I think that call, even 50 years later, is still true. That really the value of having a diverse body of folks is that you have more people in the room who have a cultural and a lived experience that is similar to the communities that they're serving. And we know that the United States in particular will be a majority nation in less than 20 years. So there's a real imperative for it. But today our major organizations are paying attention. So for example, American Society of Landscape Architects, which is our leading practitioner organization, has made a lot of strides recently in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, where they're having prominent Asian American and Pacific Islander landscape architects, give talks and share information and share their projects. And it's really making a difference. And the organization I'm on the board of, the Landscape Architecture Foundation, our major impact is through scholarships and really funding the next generation of landscape architects. And our highest award is the Olmsted Scholars Program, named after Frederick Olmsted, one of the great American landscape architects. And this is just from last year, but when we've looked at the history of this particular program and who we're rewarding, it's over 50% women. And it's 40% Black and brown people. So there is a generation coming that is making landscape architecture relevant to them and really trying to apply those skills to the communities they serve. So I think we're at the tip of a wave that's coming soon.
Absolutely. And I truly hope that is the case. I think the thing that being so involved with landscape designers and architects has taught me is that the texture of a built environment, I think, has a conversation with the community that lives in and around and among it. And so obviously that space is going to be impacted by who designs it and how they're informed with their lived experiences. So I think you gave a beautiful example in your answer of why diversity in our landscape architects and designers matters. Well, thank you, Kofi, for all those eloquent answers.
Thank you.
And now we're going to move on to hearing from Sarah Hope. And we're going to be talking about some of the strategies and challenges in designing for community building and community stewardship in parks.
Hey, everyone.
I'm going to just cue up.
Kofi, I didn't realize you were going to be talking about that book. I saw that Diane Jones was one of the authors, and she was my professor at Morgan State and my thesis advisor. I'm like, yay, Diane, my hero. I loved her.
It's funny how much of a small world it becomes when you sort of have a network of people with similar kinds of values. It's a nice thing, I think.
Yeah. It's also interesting, I did not know the information about only 200 licensed Black landscape architects. I'm not surprised because I went to a historic Black college and there were 9 of us in my class and only 1 was Black. So
that's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
But I feel really happy that we have that program in Baltimore.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to just start, Sarah, asking you the question of if you could sort of explain to the audience how you envision your role as a designer in helping to actualize a community's vision for a park. So I think that's a good segue question from where we left off with Kofi.
Sure. I guess I'm going to share my screen now. Is that possible?
Perfect. Yep.
So we had talked previously about sort of how I think about the role of a designer in a community. I guess what's interesting to me is, like, as you mentioned before, I worked at the Department of Recreation and Parks for almost 7 years, but had previously worked for a nonprofit. And my experience, it was a nonprofit called the Creative Alliance, and they do a lot of community outreach work. And so when I went to work for the Parks Department after, studying at Morgan State, which is this very dense urban experience in design, I assumed that the designers would be like very skilled and adept at interacting with the public.
Right.
It turns out that a lot of them were very shy. And one of the things that they were doing in communities is going out and saying, what do you want to see in your park? And that always kind of bothered me. And I realized that it limited the answers that the communities were giving because, especially in Baltimore City, people are sometimes not traveling beyond their neighborhoods. And
Right.
so, in my opinion, the role of the designer is more to educate and inform the community about what their options are, to talk about and give them examples of things that they could have before presenting that question, and then framing it in a way that is not about amenities specifically, but about the things that they want to happen in that space, how they see that space, the changes they want, whether it's they want to feel safer in that environment, you know, whether they want more activities for a diverse population, you know, or younger people, but also I think that the designer should inspire. So I'm pulled up this presentation that I gave for a community talking about Canton Waterfront Park. And I just wanted to show examples of the types of things that when I give a presentation, I show to communities who may not have ever thought or dreamed that they could have something in a park that looked like this or have seen anything like this. So this is one of the small pocket parks that's near Canton Waterfront Park. Canton Waterfront Park actually connects to a bigger park system, waterfront system around, I think there's a map, here we go, around Baltimore. So it's actually in the sort of far right-hand corner of this long linear piece. And so what I did was give them examples in different cities throughout the country of the ways that they could be using these parks. This is Brooklyn Waterfront Park, which is a new park. I guess now it's not so new. I visited it when it was first being built. This is a park in Pittsburgh, looking at how water features could play a role. I think the community had really voiced wanting some of these types of features. We also talked about activating the space and designing for teens. This is a space that was designed in Spain. It's actually like a skate park, climbing wall. It had space to like paint graffiti on the walls. And it just like created opportunity for different kinds of activities. This I thought was such a great idea. The splash pad turned skating rink so that you're not just having one use that happens, you know, for 3 months out of the year. And then I love this example. This is something I always talk about when people want a playground or they want something for kids. I always stress that while traditional playground equipment can be interesting in the immediate, it sort of loses its excitement, but there are ways that, you know, you can think creatively to build a space that is playful, that's not necessarily directly playground equipment.
Right.
So that's just some examples of the types of things that that I like to show communities so that they feel inspired.
No, I love that you gave those visual examples, because I think just going back to our experience in our Raleigh Parks with Purpose project, when we started, you know, it's one thing to sort of talk about bringing equity, right, to vulnerable communities of colors who maybe often don't get to be a part of a visioning process, right? That's one aspect of bringing equity in these in park design processes. Then it's a whole nother aspect to make sure that we're being equitable in helping to guide a community through imagining what's possible. Because if a community doesn't have the vocabulary of dreaming about what is possible in their community because they haven't, they haven't had access to those kinds of experiences and visions. It's sort of, I think what you were saying in your answer is that it's the landscape architect or designer's job to sort of help translate what is possible and also to present kind of a suite of options for what is possible in terms of the kinds of things they want to do and feel in a park space.
Yeah. I think it's also important the designer actually share what their role is. Like, it's funny. I mean, people used to ask, like, what's the difference between a landscape designer and a landscape architect? And it was a question that when I first started grad school, I actually didn't know that I knew the answer to. But I realized that the design of civic spaces and all the things that you have to think about, whether it's utilities, whether it's ADA compliance, how to use a space and make it feel safe or open or visible, how to make it feel like it's made for everybody is sort of a complex set of criteria that needs somebody that's skilled and versed in that to help
Absolutely
help along. Yeah,
absolutely. And then I was wondering if you could sort of talk to us or give some examples of successful park design elements that either created placemaking and or placekeeping keeping in an urban park.
I actually put together a presentation, or I guess some images of Baltimore. I kind of wanted to introduce everybody. I feel like I can talk about examples of creative placemaking throughout the world. I love to travel, but I really feel like I'm originally from Georgia and I made Baltimore home because it's this like weird mix of artists and creative people that kind of all come together to make this very unique space. And I figured if I was going to be on a national platform, I may as well be introducing people to it. So
absolutely, I'm here for that.
This is a walk through my Baltimore, is what I feel like. This
gotta rep your city. You gotta rep your city.
I know, right? I'm proud of it. It's come a long way and it still has a lot to go. This is sort of actually where I got my start in Baltimore. I bought a house on Patterson Park at a time when it was separated into each, like the north, south, east, and west of the park were the dividing lines of which type of prostitute you were interested in, which is probably
that's wild,
surprising thing to say. But it was really interesting. In this park was this pagoda feature. I kind of think of it now as like one of the more magnificent things, placemaking or creating things in Baltimore. It had been sort of dilapidated and ignored for a really long time, but the architecture is stunning. And honestly, the view from the top is the most amazing and comprehensive thing. You can see the water. I wanted to make sure that I included this little picture of the view, and that you could see in the very far background, this is another thing in Baltimore, the Natty Boh Man at the top of the building. There's National Bohemian. It's a type of beer in Baltimore that everybody sort of associates with. And this building where it used to be produced was renovated, and they put a gigantic Natty Boh head on, and at night it lights up and the eye winks. I wish I could have found a video.
It's so Baltimore.
So Baltimore, right? I mean, for those of you who know Baltimore, it's so Baltimore. If you don't, you should come visit. But I really think the renovation of this pagoda feature in the park was the first step towards really getting people interested in it. And so it really wound up creating a whole environment where at this point now they're probably struggling with gentrification, When I worked at the Creative Alliance, which was right around the corner from this park, they started what they called the Great Halloween Lantern Parade. So this has been happening, I think, for 25 years now. It's an event that celebrates the Day of the Dead. There's a really growing population of Latinx people in South Baltimore, in the area actually that I work in, but also in Southeast Baltimore. And this celebration is something that sort of embraces things about their culture. There's a whole community input process where they define how the theme for the year, and then there are workshops put together where community members can come for free and make a lantern for the lantern parade, but you're also allowed to like make your own. So there are all these crazy, unique lanterns floating around, and they have stilt walkers, and they have marching bands come and play, and usually at the end there's some sort of shadow puppet performance. But it's I know it's not probably thought of as a placemaking thing because it's more temporary, but I think that the events that we hold in the park create so much of how people view the park and what they associate, like their experience in it is how they associate it and think about it. This quickly is a bus project in Highlandtown nearby. You can see same community. The Estamos Aquí, I hope I'm not butchering that pronunciation, is We Are Here, is a bus stop that was created within the community, and this other sort of unique one. There were not covered bus stops in these locations. Public transportation is heavily used in this area, and one of the ways that the Southeast Community Development Corporation wanted to create nice, memorable spaces is to use the bus stops where people were already hanging out, where they were already having needs, as places where they could find inspiration. This is actually sort of what I was thinking of. This is Sisson Street Park. I was thinking about it a lot while Kofi was talking. It's a place where basically in this neighborhood, a developer sort of came in and started massively buying up and renovating properties. And for about 1 second, everybody thought that that was great. And then suddenly there was a lot of community concern. What wound up happening, which was great and a positive, is that this space, which you can see on the bottom left-hand side, was just a big open lot. There was really not a park nearby that was accessible, and this was a lot that was owned by housing. And so the neighborhood really came together and worked on it to renovate it, to make it a space that accommodated multiple uses. They got a shipping container and put this alligator mural on it. The alligator is sort of unique to the neighborhood. There's an old mural that featured multiple alligators on this very long, I don't know what you would have put on that wall if you didn't put an alligator, because it's a long, flat wall. So the community really identified with that image. And so they sort of reiterated it multiple times, and even in their signage. This space probably would have been developed into some sort of high-rise at this point if the community didn't say, we want this open space, we want it to look like this, we want it to be programmed with these events, and really take a dedicated part in planning it.
Absolutely. And that just made me think about, too, I never really considered until just this moment, like Baltimore is a really perfect example as a city, I think, in demonstrating how both the built design elements as well as the activities that happen in a neighborhood really instill what placemaking and placekeeping is, because everyone knows Charm City is sort of, it's a city of neighborhoods, and every neighborhood has its own character, has its own like symbols and themes that are so associated with the artistic features and design elements of green spaces and architecture in a way that's, I think, a lot more visible than a lot of other cities. So yeah, like I never thought about that until right now, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great place.
Absolutely. Well, I think in the spirit of timekeeping, that's actually a great segue in terms of talking about how both not just the design features and elements, but also the activities that happen in parks are really important in terms of the concept of placekeeping and placemaking in urban park spaces. And so now I'm gonna queue up some slides to ask questions for Rodette to talk to us about her work and experience in Garrett Park. Okay, so Rodette, just to remind everyone, she both is a manager of Filbert Street Garden, and she really takes a lead role in making sure that the green spaces in the greater Baybrook area have just like regular community engagement activities and programs. So I wanted to ask her some questions about her experience sort of coordinating those kinds of activities in green spaces in South Baltimore. So the first question I have for you, Rodette, is, so if you could just talk to us about Garrett Park, which is, that's a park that we have our Baltimore Parks with Purpose project that's ongoing. That's where we have our project. If you could talk to us about what Garrett Park was like before the new features that we put into the park, and what changes do you think had the largest impact on people using the park more, and how did art play a role in that?
Okay, so what features that they didn't have in the park at first? I can say this, when we did a survey to ask the people what they wanted in the park, what we wanted them to show ownership, and not for us to come and say, well, we want this, we want that, we want the other, we wanted community input. So we did a survey as to what the people actually wanted to see in the park. So what we found is that they needed more seating, they needed more trash cans, and also they needed plants for the native garden, and they needed a place where they could sit and can congregate. So we have a young gentleman named Delmar which is the guy that's with the little brown coat on. He was already cleaning up the park. He was already doing things in the park. He was a volunteer, and just like he was a retired person. Every morning he would go and he would clean up the park. So we looked and we said, well, we needed somebody who could be a park forest ranger. And instead of us going outside of the community to get that person to come into the community to steward the park, why not use a person who's already doing a job that's in the park? So that's when we came to Delmar and asked him, would he take on the job as being a steward of the park? So he began to, so we gave him a stipend to help keep the park clean. So that's Delmar on that end. And actually the next picture is the trash cans. We said we needed more trash cans. So what we did was one of the residents of Brooklyn, actually, that owns the printing shop, she volunteered to write a grant to get trash cans so that we could put trash cans in the park. And then we had another resident who was also part of the community, had helped her paint the trash cans. So that's how we got the trash cans for the park. So what we was doing was making people feel that they are a part of the whole situation. The next slide she's showing. So Mission Continues is a group of retired veterans. They go around all across the country to do different projects in communities, like building playgrounds, installing benches and stuff for parks and stuff. So we had connected with them to come and help us do some structural fixtures in the park, which is like benches and picnic tables and planters and stuff like that. So we invited them to come help us along with the community, which came and helped us. So we came and we got together, and they came and they helped us out. And that day it was a community engagement day, because the people in Brooklyn, Curtis Bay came together with the outside help to help us get things rolling with putting structure in the park that they would like to see. So then we decided to do programming in the park. So we have partnership with the library, which is directly across the street from the park. And we decided to do some storytelling. So what we did was invited the children in the community to come and with the storytelling, do storytelling, which was every day, not every day, every week. So we had done that. So that's the librarian, Ms. Heather, had came, and what we did was we established a relationship with the library and the kids, and we gave them little snacks, and they came every week with the Boys and Girls Club and whoever else was in the park, and we did the little story time in the park. It was basically more people started coming and started being more engaged because we have things in the park for them to do, which I believe everybody likes something to do when they go to the park. And when we looked at it, we had a survey. We wanted to service the young folks as well as the old folks in reference to having activities for people to do in the park. We noticed that we needed community board to let people know. We'd use social media, but we need a community board because more and more people were coming to the park, and they would look on the board to see whether or not, what activities that was going on for that day. We had done a what they call a Rondex chair that we put at the edge of the park so they can overlook the harbor. And so that sat at the very edge of the park, and you could overlook the whole harbor and that little chair there, and it's the picnic bench, which is really nice. We also had a little book. We had a book, a little book stand where the kids can come and get free books, which you're looking at on the bottom right-hand corner. And the important thing is that they wanted a walking path, a walking trail around the whole park. So the first phase of our Parks with a Purpose plan was to do a walking trail that was a 1 mile trail around the whole entire park. So that path right there, you can see it was around the whole park. One. And then we also did, we'll stay right there, activities. So people want to do yoga in the park. So we said, well, let's do the yoga in the park. And as you can see, with the yoga in the park, everybody's at a 6 feet distance. So we talk about social distancing. It can be still done in the park with yoga with the mats, which is 6 feet apart, that the yoga instructor is instructing the folks that came to the park. We gave free yoga instructions to the people that was in the park. Then we started planning activities, which it was never an organized activity community event planner, and which I do now, and started doing activities for kids in the park to get them more engaged. So we had got a guy who come and do hula hoops, and he did the hula hoops, and everybody looked and they liked that. And this is like one of the little events that we had, little festivals and stuff that we had in the park. And actually, Halloween time, they never had like a Halloween event in the park. And it's the funny is what I can say is that I had the two events, one at Garrett Park and also at Filbert Street Garden. But when you get people accustomed to doing what you say, it's going to be a costume contest. What that means is that wear your costume. And with Filbert Street, I have the people acclimated to wear their costumes to the costume contest. that is happening in October. But for the people in Garrett Park, it's like they haven't really got acclimated to wearing costumes to a costume event. So we had some people that came without costume, and then some people who came with costume. But they see that the people with costume, and then it was going to be a costume judging contest, although everybody got a little prize, but it's more fun when the kids come in costume, in which they had a great time with their little costumes on. So with that being said, I know that this year coming up, if we have a costume contest, it will be more kids engaged to wear their costumes, and they will think that it's very, very important that you have a costume to come to the costume contest. So I would want to say that. And right now we are just showing, we had a big centennial celebration that was also in the park. We had 100th centennial anniversary for our park, and we never celebrated park birthday, and we wanted to make it real big, so we invited the public officials and stuff to come and celebrate with us. So it's important to also engage your public officials into what you're doing in your park. They give them a sense of responsibility to the community. So the next thing,
you want to see the art?
The artwork. I'm going to talk to you about the artwork real quick. So in reference to the art, we wanted the people, especially at Filbert Street, to have a footprint, their handprint in the community. So we invited a professor from UMBC to, I have no artistic skills, so come, and he had marked up the container, and he invited the community in to paint the container and put their footprint on the container, which is their handprint. I love Lucy, I love Joey, or whoever it is. And 5 years, 10 years down the road, when you ride by a Filbert Street Garden, you see that container that's printed, and you can point out to your children or their children that, you know, this is what I did when I was little, and this is my little hand stamp of my imprint to the community. So actually, you know, it's a good thing that they feel like they are a part of the community with something that they did. They contribute to building that park space or building that green space.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just say that too, it has been a beautiful experience for me to see, because I think I started with Garrett Park as the first project that I really sunk my teeth into as a project manager, and seeing the transformation of Garrett Park, like, it makes me teary-eyed thinking about it now, because I don't know how you feel, Rodette, but for me personally, and I'm not there every day on the ground like you are, but just when I would come up to Baltimore and after the walking path went in, it was really a transformation in terms of how many people were in the park using it in the appropriate ways that you probably should use a park, rather than kind of the things that were happening in Garrett Park before there were amenities in it.
Right, right. And then we even say, come on and just have, like Stacia came up, let's have the meeting in the park, you know. So everybody just left the library and went to the park, and we sat in the park and we had a meeting in the park, you know. So we felt comfortable. It's a safe space for kids, you know, to come and play and, you know, and be a kid. You know, so we invite the kids to come to the park. You know, we have our issues in reference to trying to make sure the park equipment is in proper order, usage order, you know, so that they can fully play, you know, with this and on swings and stuff like that. But, you know, we just wanted to be a safe space for children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rodette, so much for sort of like going over the activities and how art has impacted sort of Filbert Street and Garrett Park. I know it's like, it seems like the time went by so quickly in our conversation because there's like so many rich things to talk about. But I did just want to make sure that we could at least get 1 or 2 questions in the spirit of respecting the time schedule that we have, and we're already over. I'm going to try and get in maybe 1 or 2 questions to the presenters. And I think the first question that I see here in the chat is, It's directed to Kofi, but I think that all of the presenters can answer. How do you effectively activate participatory learning in a virtual setting?
That's a really timely question because, at universities, we're struggling with that across the board regarding how we're going to teach students to keep them safe. And for right now, keeping them safe is, not coming to campus. And so we're all looking at distance learning and new technologies. I don't think there's a magic solution right now, but we can learn a lot from online learning. There are a lot of people who learn right now from the computer, from the phone, from other devices, who have social media. So we're in the process of trying to figure out some new tools to deal with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and what I was going to say really quick is that, I'm partnership with the aquarium, and they had gave me some ideas like a nature walk. You don't even have to take a nature walk in the park. You can take a nature walk right in your backyard. You can do it from virtual learning. A person can just say, well, these are the 3 things we want to see. If you can find a dandelion, a buttercup, or a 4-leaf clover or a 3-leaf clover, go into your backyard and see if you can find these 3 things, something as simple as that. And they can come back on, we got all 3 things, or we don't have all 3 things. You know what I mean? So it's like another aspect of learning, but, by virtual learning.
I think that's a great example, Rodette, because I think sometimes now we think so much in terms of just like everything being so technology heavy, in terms of how we adapt to the social distancing situation that we're in right now. But I think in terms of equitable thinking, there's ways that we can sort of use the technologies that we have at hand, but also kind of just use it as a bridge, and sort of, make things, there's simple solutions sometimes also to being in the circumstance that we're in. And it's not always just like having a million Zoom meetings, And then we've got one more question for the presenters I'd like to ask, and that's, do you have any strategies to set expectations when community priorities emerge that are challenging either logistically, financially, or politically, especially when there are direct equity implications and risk of losing community trust? That's a great question.
I would think that the part with the garden, with my garden, with Filbert Street Garden, is unity. I mean, unity as far as you never know who your partners are until you're in trouble, and you have to tell the partners that that you need help, and they step forward and help you to do whatever you need to do. And reference to me, it was land acquisition with my community garden. So with that being said, if you have an issue that you need addressed, you should let your partners know, and they can support you in any way that they can.
Right. So
don't be afraid to ask for support.
Right. Being transparent and asking for support. It's a good answer. Kofi or Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to respond to that question about setting community expectations? Like, how do you navigate that? I know that that's something that we definitely think about in Parks with Purpose, because there's a fine line between helping the community, like, not have caps on what it wants to vision, but also in tempering their expectations about what's realistic.
I think it's important to really consider if you're building a park stewardship program, if you're wanting community input, that process looks like partnership. So, there's the controlling entity, whether it's the government, or usually it's always the government, or a private owner. And then there's the community's role. And a lot of times it's interesting because I've now been on both sides, when I was in government, I was like, God, why are they asking us for so much? We can't do all of this. We don't have the staff, we don't have the time, we don't have the money. But on the other side, from the community, if nobody tells them what's needed, what would be helpful, if the communication isn't there from the start, how are they supposed to know, you know?
Right.
And so what needs to happen is when those partnerships exist, each entity needs to be clear about what it is they can provide, and what it is that they need. You know, communities have strengths, and governments have strengths. A lot of the images, unfortunately, I didn't get to all of them, but, you know, those bus stop pictures, those never would have happened with just a community person trying to make it happen. Those happened because partners played a role. There was a vision. Those partners went to the government agencies that they needed to negotiate with. They went to the state agencies and Maryland Transportation Authority that they needed to negotiate with to make those projects happen. Like some of the most impactful spaces, they can't happen unless there are multiple entities, advocating. That was the other thing that used to happen when I was working for Baltimore City, is that I would want something to happen, but as an employee for the government, I couldn't advocate for that. The person that can is somebody in the community saying, we need this thing. Like, this is dire for our community. And so each person has a role. Understanding what those roles are, I think, helps with the outcomes. And then that's sort of the logistical question. Financially and politically, your politicians should be there with you. I mean, Rodette said that right up front, you know, that you need to get, those are your other partners. Those are the, I mean, in the instance of Garrett Park, those are the people who advocated for funding for that park. We got $250,000 from a bond bill for that park. You know, when we submitted the Bernie application, that's Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiatives, you know, the support from our legislators was intense. And I think that's why it was funded. Typically they don't fund open space projects. They want to see direct impact for economic benefit. And I think that while we all realize that economic benefit comes from beautiful, active park spaces, especially ones on commercial corridors, that there's more value in a development that you know, houses 100 people, where people are paying taxes or rents, or, you know. So financially is a challenge, but I think you take on the things that you can in the immediate, and you try. I mean, the process of developing a space can be years. I think that the expectation is that a lot of times from the community, the expectation is that it's going to take 3 months, because that's what it would take them to lay the patio in their backyard, you know, but that these are projects that have a severe financial budgetary lift, and to really prepare for that is going to be a multi-year process. So you just do what you can, you know. Like at Garrett Park, we had $200,000. We did what we could do with $200,000, and we got another $250,000, and we're doing that part, and then we got another $250,000, and we're going to do that. And so, you know, it's a staged process, and it just takes a lot of time. Be patient.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line between inspiring hope and being honest with communities. I've just seen in my own personal development as, you know, a park practitioner, project manager, that a lot of people sort of get squirmy about giving the community the real facts about sort of like what it costs to actually build out a park, to talk about the long game of the, you know, the phased approach that it takes for a park to be revitalized. But what I've learned in my short time working as a park practitioner is that communities really do respect when you're honest with them. And to be honest, doesn't necessarily mean that you're squashing the dreams of the community. It's capacity building the community to be empowered enough to sort of understand, like, yes, we can work towards these things collectively as a community by fundraising and, you know, and talking about the pragmatics of what it takes to get these things that they vision, but we can't sort of like get anywhere without having a frank conversation about like what's possible and what's practical. Well, this has been such a lovely conversation. I'm so happy that I got to sort of facilitate a conversation with the three of you. It was very enriching to me, and I hope for the audience as well. And I just want to thank you guys, each of you presenters, for being a part of this process and for sharing your experiences and knowledge about sort of placekeeping, placemaking, and stewardship in urban parks. I think we had some really rich content and conversation during this webinar. And I will make sure once we've got this recording edited to distribute it to all of the participants, as well as the PowerPoint materials for any of those who are interested in having access to them. So thank you guys. Again, thank you presenters, and thanks for everyone who tuned in today. We will have one more webinar in our spring series, so be looking for information about that, and thanks again for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.